Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you so much for downloading us and helping out the cause of the best podcast in the universe about the Minnesota Vikings. Sure.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, why not? Also on the line is our analyst, our head honcho, the man who brings legitimacy back to Minnesota Vikings coverage, or not. Ladies and gentlemen, Arif Hassan.
So is this where you, because you're the producer, right? So is this where you like put in sort of a sound clip of all the people cheering and clapping?
Yeah, until the public turns on you, which I imagine will happen during the next Chad Greenway piece, which that's scheduled for training camp, right?
Yes, they hit right 2 days before training camp.
2 days before training camp, it'll be good. Arif Hassan is also the editor-in-chief of Vikings Territory, writes for many different blogs. Dusty is currently on assignment. He is currently at the Aaron Hernandez trial. His laptop is actually at the Aaron Hernandez trial. They're trying to network, get a little bit of FaceTime with NFL executives, and score some of that sweet, sweet PCP.
There's a lot of laptop jokes here.
There's a lot of PCP happening at the Aaron Hernandez trial. We are here to talk about the Minnesota Vikings. And it's the off season, so there's not a lot to talk about. But we did have a couple of signings we can touch on, and a couple of different restructures. But first, we do want to thank our listeners for contributing and helping out and keeping the lights on for us, especially during the off season. We are ramping up for what's coming with the decision from Adrian Peterson and the Vikings. We will not be talking about that today. We will also be ramping up for the draft, and we'll also be gearing up for training camp. So we want to thank a couple of listeners real quick. Cody Knuth, who says, "Hi, my name is Cody. I'm following every thread of Viking news from sunny Kansas City, Missouri. Keep fighting the good fight." Thank you again, Cody. Also, we have Aaron Rupp from Marion, Iowa. Says he's done binge listening. So I suppose that means we have to produce some more content.
Yeah, and we got this note from Aaron a while ago, well before I think our most recent episode, which was 4 weeks ago.
It must be 3.
So sorry, Aaron. We learned you were done binge listening, and we figured we'd save you from dangerous binging.
We're actually just trying to confuse your iTunes account. So when you check your phone in the morning, all of a sudden, like, there's another one on there. All right, awesome. And special thanks to Cody Whittington of Montgomery, Illinois, best Viking site around. Oh yeah, Arif is pretty cool too.
Appreciate that, Cody. He's a good follower. I like him. He tweets at me a lot.
I didn't know your mom had changed her name to Cody Whittington.
My mom would never compliment me. Are you kidding me?
That's actually a possibility. I have met your mother. Okay. Well, thank you to Cody, Aaron, and Cody. Didn't realize that till just now. Thanks to the three of them for contributing and helping keep this being an advertisement-free podcast. You don't want to listen to me talk about Audible or Stamps.com, and you don't want to have Arif talk to you about the glorious updated fashions and strength of texture and just the comfortableness of MeUndies. You don't want to have Arif talk about MeUndies.
Forget about the MeUndies pitch.
The MeUndies pitch is not going to happen, thanks to these three people. If you'd like to contribute and help keep this podcast commercial-free, you can do so at NorseCodePodcast.com. We have the donate button there. More than welcome to help out. $10 is cool. We are totally cool with that. We're just trying to keep the podcast nice and free and available online in as many places as we can. So, Chad Greenway restructured his contract. He is not released. He's not traded. He's not pushing up the daisies in Oakland. He's not
traded would have been a bit of a stretch.
He's not working for, or he's not currently an Eagle. He's not being he's not being used as anything up in Buffalo. He is. I'm just picking those two teams since they just decided to swallow the talent of the offseason. But Greenway stays a Viking.
That is
restructures his contract.
That's true. That is news.
That is news. How do you feel about this, Arif?
That's how I feel. So, like, I'm not going to say I'm conflicted on Chad Greenway, because I'm not. I don't think he should be on the team.
At no point would any listener of ours who's listened to more than an episode consider you to be conflicted on Chad Greenway.
I do want to get this out. The more that you write in the bigger audience that you develop, and the more likely it is that players read your work. The more that you do, right? And the more that you talk to players every year, the harder. And I'm not saying it's a huge obstacle or anything like that. I clearly haven't pulled punches on some of these players, but it is still harder to write about ending people's careers, basically. Because I am advocating loudly to however many thousands of people, right, that Chad Greenway should no longer have a job. Can you imagine, if just ran 1,000 people just showed up outside? I think you have a new job now. It said your new job, right? And James Pagashnik is terrible at this job. I have compiled 3 GIFs that demonstrate this fact. And here's a 3,000-word article that explains in excruciating detail why the reasons that you think he's good are not true, and the reasons that he's bad are super true. That's weird, right?
That would be very, very, very weird.
Right.
Especially because I don't know if you could write 3,000 words on what I do at the University of Minnesota.
I couldn't write 10, so that's great. But I am sure if I observed you for a day, I'd have more than enough material to condemn you.
I'm just imagining you putting together GIFs of me on Reddit or something. For 20 minutes that he was not on break.
Right. In my head, you're a high school AV guy, and all you do is wheel TVs from one classroom to another. I don't actually know what you do.
I do more than just wheel TVs, but I do actually wheel
one
TVs
of your jobs, though, right? Oh, yes. Fantastic.
I do have to wheel a giant TV into rooms every once in a while.
That's amazing.
That is one of the 20 things I do.
2015. That's amazing.
It's a big ass TV.
There's projectors in 90% of the rooms at the U. Well, maybe not 90, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, and there are rooms that are put aside for little meetings that don't have them yet because we can't get the funding to put them into the damn wall. Not the point. The point is that Chad Greenway has all these people telling him that he shouldn't have a job, and he says screw that and restructured his contract.
Yeah, and I mean, if I were him, yeah, totally screw that. I would totally do whatever it takes to continue earning another $3 million. But I think that he should not start for the Vikings at will linebacker or any linebacker position if I wanted to be a little bit broader. And I think that the Vikings have 2 holes at linebacker, one at middle linebacker, where Jasper Brinkley just left, and one at weak side linebacker, where Chad Greenway is there. I don't know if he's even the presumed starter. I mean, the last time a Vikings player took a restructure for a pay cut, they left. That was Jamarcus Sanford. He was cut. But then also Jerome Felton left, right? So the last 2 players that took pay cuts left the year after, right? Obviously, Chad Greenway is probably not going to be here the year after, but Sanford was also gone the year he took the pay cut. So I mean, that's somewhat relevant information. I think that you give a starter who took a pay cut who's gone now, and I thought Sanford played better than Greenway last year at a position that is in fact harder to replace. But I think I think the Vikings want Greenway to win the job. I think that the backups that they have, so you've got Audie Cole and Gerald Hodges, I think that they played well in terms of their performance, but I think that there are markers of their play that point to an unlikelihood of sustaining good performance in the future. I could be wrong. I've been wrong on Audie Cole like 3 times in a row now. I have never been right about this guy. He's outperformed all of my expectations every single time I've said something about him. So, I could be like really wrong about this, but I don't think Audie Cole or Gerald Hodges are should be the starters going forward. So, in my mind, this restructuring of Chad Greenway's contract, I think, is a bad move because it helps to take 4.6 or 4. Maybe it's 5.2. I don't know because I think he was earning 7.7. Now he's earning 3.4. So it's like 5.3. No, 4.3. God, I'm so bad at math. Anyway, $4 million, somewhere around there, of money in cap space. But you could have saved $7.7 million in cap space, and you'd still have a hole at weak side linebacker. People always talk about, how dangerous it is to cut a player at a position that you don't have depth at. And so, for example, cutting Charlie Johnson at guard was sort of interesting because we don't have depth there, but no one really wanted him to start, and he was earning starter money. And so that's an issue, especially because the Vikings chose not to pursue the other depth they had at guard, Vlad Ducasse. They obviously re-signed Joe Berger, but they cut Charlie Johnson before they knew they were going to be able to re-sign Berger, although I suppose they knew that the negotiations were going well. Still, they cut him before they made a deal with Berger. So at the time they cut Johnson, they had no backup guard other than Yankee, which means they had no depth, right? And while people were happy to see Johnson go, that's definitely a concern. This doesn't seem to come up when you talk about someone like Chad Greenway, who I think, again, performed worse at his job than Johnson did at his. And people want to keep Greenway. And I think that it makes sense to think that someone who is a bad starter is a good backup. And I think actually, generally speaking, we should have that instinct and reflex more often. But that's not always true. If you're one of the worst starters at your position, there are any number of backups that are likely better than you and potential mid-round draft picks that could be better than you. I think a good example would be Jamarcus Webb, who was just a terrible, awful offensive tackle for the Chicago Bears for 3 years, right? He was just bad forever. And then he got cut, and then the Vikings signed him, and everyone was like, oh, well, that's good depth. We don't want him to start, but that's good depth. Well, no, it wasn't good depth. He just wasn't good. You didn't want him. He's not good depth. At a position that it's not necessarily as easy to find, right? Although I still think it's harder to find guards. And I think that the same is true of Chad Greenway. I don't think a lot of Casey Matthews, but I bet he's better at being a linebacker than Chad Greenway is. Now, in terms of being a mentor, being a veteran, teaching the defense to people, probably not. But I think in terms of on-field play, probably. And there's something to be said about these play callers. We've glossed over it a lot of times, and it sort of bit us in the ass when Gerald Hodges was given the green dot and was supposed to call defensive plays, believe against Detroit? ? And that turned out to be a mess. It was one of the worst defensive performances we had, and a lot of it was a result of confusion and bad gap discipline, etc. And then Audie Cole got the green dot, and I guess that fixed it. But there are multiple players on the roster who can be bad at linebacker and be good at having a green dot. And so I don't see why you have to pay Chad Greenway $3.5 million to be bad at linebacker and good at having a green dot. There's a couple of people who could do that.
There's a couple of people who could do that for a hell of a lot less money.
Yeah. And Greenway's old, and he's had to deal with multiple knee injuries, and he's slower than he was. And I really think that his instincts or whatever, his first step maybe, it's easy to confuse the two. I think they've dulled. I don't think his instincts are as good as they were, or whatever the on-field representation of what having good instincts means. I don't think they're there anymore. So, yeah, would have preferred not to have restructured Greenway. I would have rather cut him the same time I cut Charlie Johnson.
Yeah. I'm just in a way, it's good that the Greenway's sticking around. I'm still convinced that Chad Greenway is your inside source into all things happening in the organization. It's one of those, like, who is the least likely person to be Deep Throat? And it's gonna be the guy that you've cut down repeatedly, who you've actually like spoken to personally about articles. Like, no, it's gonna be Greenway. Greenway's Deep Throat here.
I think that would be a really good long con for me.
That would be an amazing long con for you. Yes.
You give me a lot of credit when you give me that one. I would love to be that clever.
John Sullivan, our center, is also getting a bit of a raise this offseason.
Yeah, bully for him. I love him. Let's talk about good players on the roster.
Let's talk about people that we like. A good center.
Yeah. At times, although probably not these last 2 years, at times the best center in the NFL, and I would fight people for that. I think he was great at center. I thought he was very good at center for most of the year. This last year, I thought he was better the year before. I thought he was phenomenal the year before that. I don't think he's like aging or anything. I think it's just like sometimes you just have to deal with stuff. And we talked about this when I was talking about momentum. Patterns occasionally emerge, and sometimes they don't mean anything. And I think that the fact that his last 2 years of play were not up to his usual standards, but still extremely good, are not indicative of a drop-off in his play. And I think the Vikings agree with that when they extended him. He is certainly a top 3 center, and at worst a top 5 center, and will continue to be, I think, throughout the remainder of his contract. So fantastic. The Vikings have issues on their offensive line. Secure the pieces that are good. Right now there's 3 of those. There's John Sullivan, Brandon Fusco, and the much maligned, but I think he's turned it around, Phil Lodeholt.
He was already under contract for the next 2 years at $4.65 million in base salary. Mm-hmm. Now he will be making $7 million this year and $5.5 the next 2.
Yeah, no, it's quite the raise, especially because centers don't get paid a lot.
And I'm definitely on the record saying how much a center means to a team. You can watch a bunch of teams from last year and watch as their center went down and watch their offensive line basically collapse. Not necessarily being able to figure out play call or additional penalties that end up coming through. A center is really super important to a line, and if you have a good one, it's hard to it tends to be hard to keep them. So it's good that the Vikings ended up giving a nice little raise to Mr. Sullivan here. That's a decent little raise from 4.65 to 7. That's certainly not bad at all.
Yeah, it consumed half the money you freed up by restructuring Greenway. Worth it.
Yeah. So in a way, we can thank Greenway for that.
I'll be sure to do that next time I confront him at training camp.
I was going to say, next time you talk to him on his 3rd cell phone, we'll deal with it from there. Terrence Newman signed with the Vikings this offseason now. I guess the question is, who is he going to be backing up, or who is he going to take the starting position from?
Yeah, it's kind of unusual because the money that he signed for, which wasn't very much, isn't really indicative of starter money, right? It's really high-end backup money. In fact, I was kind of hoping he'd sign for close to minimum because then it wouldn't count against the compensatory pick, compensation formula, right? But he signed for $1.4 million, which is definitely not quote unquote starting cornerback money. In fact, I think Josh Robinson makes more than him right now on his rookie contract. Yeah, he does. He makes like $3 million. Anyway, no, it doesn't. Never mind. It's like $760,000. Man, these rookie contracts are super cheap. But yeah, a free agent signing for like $1 million is very much like a backup. Like Chris Cook signed for more money, to put this in context. And so I don't anticipate him definitively having a bigger role. Like I know some people have said that they are confident he's going to start, and I don't really know why that is. He was actually okay last year. In fact, I liked how he played. He obviously isn't like the 4.36 40-yard dash quarterback that he was coming out, and he has some obvious like physical limitations in that department. But I mean, you're right. He knows Zimmer's scheme, and I think that his primary role is going to be someone who teaches the defense, which I think is pretty significant given sort of like the majority of the problems throughout the year that there were on defense in terms of the secondary had much more to do with assignment and confusion than it did ability. I think that the talent and ability in that defense is there, and I think a good example of that might be Captain Munnerlyn, who's had a number of really good years in the slot, had a bunch of high-profile mistakes that cost the Vikings points, and that's what's going to happen. If you take a look at the Chris Crocker contract that was signed last year, starting safety for Zimmer, who also played in the slot in Cincinnati, and he was released by Cincinnati in 2012. The Vikings signed him in 2013 for $1 million, right? And so Newman is signing for, more than that. I think his cap hit is actually closer to 2.2, but his base salary is about 1.4 million. And I wouldn't be surprised to see Newman come in mostly just to teach the defense what's what. I don't really understand this as being a replacement for Josh Robinson. I see him as a backup to Josh Robinson. The biggest issue that people have with Josh Robinson from this season is the Chicago Bears game, right? Like that's
definitely.
Yeah. And it's just the one Chicago Bears game. The other Chicago Bears game wasn't as bad. In fact, it wasn't bad at all. It was actually good. I thought Josh Robinson had a good year. I thought he started off really strong. And
if you were going to replace him, you would have done it last year.
I think so. I think that Zimmer is the that kind of person I wanted to give a cornerback with that much talent, physical talent anyway, not necessarily talent at the position a chance. I mean, he's fast and he's physical. He's super physical. He's a great tackler and stuff like that. But if you pointed to one reason why Josh Robinson struggled so much against Chicago, what do you think that reason would be? And it's the one that Mike Zimmer even said was the reason. It was his height, right? It was just his height.
They're like, oh, dude's short, can't defend that.
Terrence Newman is a quarter of an inch taller than Josh Robinson.
Oh, well, then why did we only sign him to a 2-point-whatever million contract?
I just think that when people talk about what they disliked about Josh Robinson last year, and then they pinpoint those reasons, Terrence Newman doesn't solve that reason. He's shorter. He's good in the slot. Josh Robinson is not, so there's a difference there. But you still have Captain Munnerlyn, Josh Robinson, Terrence Newman. You still have a bunch of people under 5'11", dealing with some of the bigger receivers that are in the NFC North. And thankfully, there's no more Brandon Marshall. He's in New York to wilt away the rest of his career.
Yay!
But yeah, I don't see Newman as a replacement for Robinson. I think Robinson had a very good year. I think that sort of the one game is sort of overshadowing everything. I think people were really resistant to the idea early on when people were pointing out that Josh Robinson was playing well. And then that resistance was confirmed by a bad game, and then people weren't really taking a look at sort of how well Josh Robinson was playing sort of at the end of the year. And I had some problem with him on some in-breaking routes and stuff like that. Problems that Terrence Newman necessarily doesn't have. But I don't think Newman solves a problem and that Josh Robinson, generally speaking, doesn't solve. So I think that, for the most part, Newman is a backup who can play both in the outside and in the slot. I think that Captain Munnerlyn, I think he just needs a year in the defense. And you hear that all the time, especially from young players, which Munnerlyn isn't quite. But you hear it all the time, he just needs a year more in the offense or a year more in the defense.
Just needs to get more time in the scheme.
Yeah, and you hear it all the time, and it's not reassuring because you've heard it so many times, and so many players have failed to fulfill their potential after playing a year or 2 or 3 in the scheme. I mean, remember, we were even saying this about Christian Ponder. He had a decent rookie year. Imagine how good he'll be without the lockout, with a year in the scheme, when he can learn sort of what the offense is supposed to do. And then he bombed.
Second year, Musgrave and him are going to click. It's just going to be like magic.
And then after that, people were saying basically the same thing. Oh, well, he's only had one off season, and you grow the most between your first and second off season. So really, he's just a rookie because that lockout means it doesn't count, or whatever, right? He just needs another year in the scheme. And so I understand why saying that about a player who underperformed in some pretty significant ways last year is not that reassuring. But there's 2 reasons I think that that's true in this case, that another year in the scheme is going to help him. I think the first is that what we talked about earlier, I think the biggest and most significant problem for Munnerlyn was not talent, which is one of the issues for Christian Ponder. A lot of the traits that you want in a quarterback, he just doesn't have. But if there's one thing Christian Ponder knows, it's the offense. I mean, he's very whiteboard smart. But Munnerlyn had just issues with just knowing what he needed to do, and there were times where after a significant play, a couple of the other players would come up to Munnerlyn and probably hit him in the head or something, or like yell at him, maybe in like never in a bad. I don't want it's difficult to describe these interactions without being like, so they verbally abused him. Which they didn't. They just yelled at him, which is what teammates do in sort of the heat of an athletic competition.
Like, dude, you lined up in the wrong spot.
Yeah, and so you saw that happen a lot. So I think the nature of his problems point to that, 1, and then 2, he has a history of very good slot quarterback play in Carolina. And I talked to a bunch of people who are fans of the Carolina Panthers, people whose opinions I think are very smart when it comes to football anyway, and they said that Munnerlyn struggled in his first year learning the scheme in Carolina, too. And if Munnerlyn's a slow learner, that's abstractly a problem. Maybe we should have been able to better anticipate this problem because he became a full-time starter on the outside and then on the inside and nickel. But it does mean that he can be a very good player if given enough time. And I think 1 year is that time. And so I think that if you give him sort of that ability, and the Vikings, the way that they ask their quarterbacks to play is much closer to man coverage than it is to zone coverage, which is kind of what he was familiar with in Carolina. Which isn't to say the Vikings run more man coverage, just the techniques tend to match that a little bit more. There's some dissimilarities that you can point to that would explain other kinds of discrepancies. I think that's something you want to watch out for. But I think in this case, Munnerlyn, who admitted himself this was the worst year in his career, is set to improve, because I don't think a player in the middle of their career, right? So they've already had 4 or 5 years in the NFL. Suddenly they move to a new team, and then they have the worst year of their career after that year. It is very difficult for me to believe that is a coincidence. Just like I thought it was very difficult to believe that Josh Freeman having the worst game of his career, 12 days after he arrived is a coincidence. I don't think that is. I think the Vikings did him wrong. But I think it's a similar concept when you talk about Captain Munnerlyn. It is likely not a coincidence that he suddenly had his worst year coming to a new system, when his second worst year was his rookie year coming into a new system. And so I think it is unlikely he's going to have another year as bad as that. And then I think I only mentioned 2 reasons. I think there could be a third reason. He wasn't targeted very often. For all of the mistakes that he had, for all of the big plays that we saw and remember him give up, he actually wasn't targeted very often relative to how many snaps he took. Which isn't to say, he was a blanket except for some pretty significant mistakes. He was a cornerback. He wasn't great. He wasn't bad on the non-mistake plays. But it is important to remember he wasn't targeted very often, which means that when he did know his assignment, they didn't want to they didn't want to throw at him. So I think I think that's relevant. He got targeted less often per snap and coverage than even Xavier Rhodes, who ended the year phenomenally. So I think all of that together, I think, points to a player who is set to improve. And I don't think Terrence Newman can be better than that in that context. In fact, Terrence Newman was targeted quite often. Some of that has to do with the talent that Cincinnati has. I mean, they have Leon Hall, who isn't as good as he was, but he's still maybe a top 10, certainly a top 15, but maybe a top 10 cornerback in the league, which is to say he's no longer in the top 5 discussion. But they had Leon Hall, and they had Pac-Man Jones, who's better than Newman at this point in their careers, and then Newman, who's targeted quite often, but on those targets was actually pretty decent. So I think that all comes into play, and I think Newman is a backup to both the slot position, which he can play, although he didn't play it that much because of Leon Hall, and Josh Robinson. So those are my thoughts.
Those are your thoughts. Terrence Newman should be at least interesting to watch during the preseason. It'd be kind of cool to see how he ends up kind of directing things back there during the first 3 games anyway.
Yeah.
We also signed Mike Kafka, a backup quarterback. That's from Tampa Bay, right?
Mike Kafka's been everywhere. The last I remember him was in Philadelphia, but I should have as soon as he was signed, I should have looked up his career history. So yeah, last was Tampa Bay. So Philadelphia for 2 years, then nowhere in 2012. Then the Patriots and the Jaguars in the 2013 offseason, the Buccaneers for the 2014 season, and then the Vikings.
So basically he's trying to do the Will Ferrell thing and just play for every team.
Yeah. Might have to do the Will Ferrell thing in earnest and do it during the offseason.
Be slightly easier anyway.
Yeah. But yeah.
Little known fact about Mike Kafka, he is the record holder for rushing yards by a QB for Northwestern University.
Really?
217 yards in a game.
Wow, that's a fact and a surprising one.
Yes, indeed that is.
So Kafka is someone I didn't think too much about ever. So I don't really have a scouting report on him or anything like that. But what I can do is I can read what Matt Waldman had to say on him way back when he was coming out for the draft. Let's see. So he was listed as a project. Kafka is a good athlete who I watched frustrate Ohio State's defense in 2008 with his mobility and pocket presence. He played in a quick strike, 2-read offense like Tebow McCoy, Lefevre, and Brown, but I think he has more potential to be an effective drop-back passer. So, decent praise. He is a project, but we can take a look at sort of the categories and final rankings for Kafka from Matt Walden's rookie scouting portfolio, which I encourage people to purchase the most recent version for 2015 because it is simply one of the best draft guides on the market. Okay, so if you wanted to take a look at so his game against Ohio State was sort of the one that Waldman ended up scouting. He's got prototypical size for a quarterback. And in that game, Waldman noticed that Kafka had relatively good accuracy, but that was sort of buffered by a number of short passes. His short accuracy is good. His accuracy on the move going to the right is good. On the left, it's not great. Intermediate accuracy, not great. Deep accuracy, not great. He's not known for his arm strength, according to the scouting report. Again, not mine. But he's got I would argue that this is kind of surprising. For a quarterback listed as a project and a quarterback listed as someone coming out of maybe not a gimmick offense, but an offense not conducive to NFL play, he does have a very effective mechanical delivery. So he can adjust the platform of his delivery, maybe a sidearm, maybe an underhand, maybe a shovel, based on sort of the defense around him. He throws a catchable ball. He's got a quick release, and he's got a compact delivery. He can clean it up a little bit and increase his arm strength. So there's that. He does not look off defenders. Back in 2009. He does not avoid double coverage, kind of important. He was not asked to make any adjustments at the line, but he does use pump fakes well. He does distribute the ball well. And then in terms of pocket presence, which I think is maybe one of the most important things when evaluating a quarterback, because that's very difficult to teach. He buys time effectively within the pocket. That's a big thing. He can make sort of small moves to move around, or more often, what he did was he made sort of bigger moves in order to get time. So he was not necessarily efficient with his footwork, but he was able to extend plays. He's willing to take a hit in order to deliver the ball. He has a good sense of the pass rush around him. He needs to do a better job to throw the ball away to avoid sacks. He's a good scrambler. I think we sort of established that with the blurb that we got from Waldman. But yeah, so if you can develop his arm, then you can have a more complete package, because he's got the size, he's got the pocket presence, and he's got the delivery. He just needs a better arm, which, again, we've talked about this before on the podcast. One can do that. One can get a stronger arm once they enter the NFL.
Yep. So he's now listed as what, our third backup, or are we looking at practice squad for him?
He right now is the third backup. Pat Devlin was released after they signed him. After they signed Kafka. I think most likely what would happen is the Vikings, if they can move around enough in the draft and get 10 picks, which is what their goal is, then I think they definitely draft a late-round quarterback. And the most hilarious one would be Brandon Bridge, because then you could have Teddy Bridgewater and Brandon Bridge. But there's a bunch of...
Really?
I mean, he's an option in the 7th round who's, kind of talented. So,
sure.
Just let me have this. If not, there's a number of other quarterbacks in the draft. The point has been made that this is not a very good draft for quarterbacks, and I think that people are sort of overselling that point. I agree. If you want a starter that is going to be like a good starter, as much as
a superstar starter, you're probably not going to be finding two, three picks into this thing.
Right. But if you want like a developmental prospect, I think, in my opinion, there are better developmental prospects in this draft than there are in a lot of other drafts. It just happens to also be a weaker quarterback draft for people who would, need a quarterback, which is usually how drafts are defined. So I understand that, but it is missing that there are some talented players for what you get. So, like, more talented than a typical 6th or 7th round pick at quarterback is what I'm trying to get at.
Let's move on to our to the next person. We can just talk very briefly about Caesar Rayford. He is that's a defensive tackle, isn't it?
Defensive end.
Defensive end, yep.
But he's about 10.5, 20 pounds, or 10 to 15 pounds away from being a defensive tackle.
Yeah. He's bounced out of the CFL to the NFL, back to the CFL, and now back to the NFL. In the NFL, he's played for both the Colts and the Cowboys, mainly on the practice squad, and is played for, by the looks of his page, nearly every CFL team.
Yeah, when I wrote up the, hey, we signed this guy thing for Vikings territory, I went to Wikipedia, just like I assume you did, and I was, like, shocked at, like, I couldn't tweet out the teams that he played. It took up too many characters, even when I got rid of the city name. So he played for the BC Lions. You have to include the city name, otherwise people are going to think you're talking about Detroit. The Shock, the Blaze, the Colts, the Cowboys, the Sharks, the Stampeders, the Alouettes, now the Vikings. I didn't have enough characters, so I just screenshotted it and I tweeted that out instead.
So, like, he was a practice squad member and has played a couple of games just about everywhere in Canada.
Yeah.
So we have him, and we have Babatunde.
Babatunde Ayabusi.
Babatunde. And one of the reasons why you listen to podcasts is to get the inside scoop, to get the real information on players and the inner workings of the Vikings. We sent Arif out to a Polish establishment in the Twin Cities, and he happened to have run into Babatunde. Could you explain just how large Babatunde is?
Well, does it count if I say he has deceptive size?
I think deceptive size is a thing.
Yeah, sure. So I'll talk about... Okay, so first to explain... I just went to Kramer Chicks to get a Reuben, which they have amazing Reubens. I recommend them. And I didn't even think, hey, we just signed a Polish player. There's a chance that he wants to eat Polish food and Nice Polonaise just closed down. Maybe Kramer Chicks is a good place to go. Obviously, that would be a stupid thing to think and hope on the off chance you'll find a player eating dinner there. But I saw a giant man that looked somewhat familiar from the highlight films they showed and the Pro Day film that I tweeted out. And I was like, there's not a bunch of 6'9" dudes or whatever just hanging out in Polish. This has to be the Polish guy we signed who's 6'9". There's no other way. So I asked if he was Babs, because I didn't want to, I'm confident enough in his name to say Babatunde Ayabusi on a podcast. I'm not confident enough to, say it to him, right? So I asked if he was Babs. He said yes. And I was like, hey, cool, I'm a Vikings blogger. I'll see you in training camp. And I sort of walked away, and I was like, that dude is huge. He's massive. But no one would ever think he's bigger than Phil Lodeholt by looking at him. And the thing is, I believe he is both taller and heavier than Phil Lodeholt. I don't know what his actual height is, because who can believe the heights that are listed, right? But he's supposed to be 6'8" or whatever, 6'9" maybe, who knows? But I believe he's taller than Phil Lodeholt, and he's certainly heavier. He's 20 pounds heavier than Phil Lodeholt's listed weight. And again, you don't want to believe the listed whatevers. I do believe Phil Lodeholt's listed weight matches sort of what his target weight is. It's not like a defensive tackle like Pat Williams, right, where he clearly played above his listed 317 pounds. And so I think that Phil Lodeholt is a pretty good... He's always been the most massive player on the roster, right? He does not look bigger than Phil Lodeholt, and I think that's because either he has a better muscle-fat ratio than Lodeholt, because muscle weighs more, or it could just be his muscles are just denser, or his frame is deceptive. If Phil Lodeholt has a smaller-ish frame, then things bulge out a little bit more if you weigh them. So if Ayabusi has wider hips and wider shoulders and whatever, then it carries on his frame a little in a way that makes it look a little bit more lean. Whatever it is, he doesn't look as big as Lodeholt, but he's heavier. And man, I am such a tiny dude. When I stand next to people who are legitimately large, like Lodeholt and Babs, it's just a weird experience.
See, we already have him on a nickname basis. How awesome is that going into training camp?
Well, that's what he said his name. That's how he tells people, just call me Babs. I assume because he doesn't want to keep on correcting people's pronunciations. So
he doesn't want to correct people to say Babatunde.
Yeah, because not everyone has the gravitas that you have.
Not everybody has the bass in the voice to be able to roll something like that off.
Yeah.
Damn shame. Two quick things we want to talk about. First off, I almost want to put this as a question in the mailbag, but we've talked about it earlier that Jasper Brinkley is no longer on the team, and the Vikings. There's a report asking if the Vikings are going to be drafting a replacement for Jasper Brinkley. What are your thoughts on that?
Maybe. I hope it's not early, because I think you can I don't want to say make up or provide, just create inside linebacker play. Obviously, the Vikings had some issue with that. For the most part, though, you can. The Vikings just didn't do a good job with it. So I think that outside linebacker position will be harder to find early in the draft. So I'd like to draft that earlier. I do think that there are inside linebacker options, and there's some like fairly athletic ones too. I don't remember the article that's in the show notes, and I haven't pulled it up, but I assume some of the players that are being mentioned include Stephon Anthony from Clemson, Bernard McKinney from Mississippi State. Bernard McKinney is like very athletic, but in a very specific way. He's sort of stiff, and so you don't really want him playing outside linebacker where he has to flip his hips more often in coverage or sort of spill to the sidelines. But he's very like fast, and he's very explosive, and he's super tall, and he's pretty heavy. And so all of those things are like really good for like a Zimmer-style defenseman linebacker. I just don't want to pay what you have to pay in order to get him. And so I would not be surprised if they found an inside linebacker in the draft. I still think, and I think the Vikings, according to Darren Wolfson, I think the Vikings did end up contacting Brandon Spikes-ish. But it sounds like they're not really in the race for him. They're not really in the slow jog for him in free agency, but he's definitely the kind of player I wanted to sign because he's cheap. And like, as much as people knock two-down players, and maybe they should, right? Like maybe people should be wary of the kind of investment that it takes to have a two-down player versus a three-down player, and like underinvest in two-down players. I think that that doesn't mean they're like bad. That's 66% of the downs if you're really bad, and like 85% of the downs if you're all right. Like that's still a lot of downs that you're asking someone to play. And so it's useful to have those kinds of players on your roster if they're really good on those two downs. Brandon Spikes is that kind of player. So I kind of wanted that. It sounds like that's not happening. So the Vikings will probably have to trade down in the first. Maybe trade away an asset like Adrian Peterson to get enough picks that they can be secure enough in sort of the mid-rounds to get a middle linebacker that can replace Brinkley relatively early. Or they just really like Audie Cole, which I understand. He's big, he's fast, he's not necessarily fluid, although he did show like more fluidity at will linebacker the one game he played there. And he's instinctive, at least in zone coverage. And you're not going to ask him to run that much man coverage. So I would understand. But yeah.
Last thing we want to quick mention is that hell froze over, and Josh Freeman has a job again. He has signed with Miami.
So I sort of expected, like, if Josh Freeman was going to get a job again, it would be in Philadelphia, just because Chip is just like crazy enough to do that kind of stuff.
Be like, well, I don't know if we could start him as a quarterback, but we could sure as hell put him as a nose tackle. we can just find a way to put him on here. I love the fact that the Philadelphia Eagles outfitters, like the stores in Philly, aren't stocking Bradford's jersey yet.
Jersey? That's amazing.
Like, so I know he says he's starting, but Josh Freeman is signed to Miami. He is. I'm just kind of surprised after the Monday Night Football game that he's back with anyone. Like it just seemed like such a for sure thing. Like, oh, you put up a stinker like that on national television as the only game that's on that night.
Well, so
even the Sports Center, like even when Sports Center was cut to right after the game, even they were apologizing for what was just aired on their TVs.
It was the first time I heard John Gruden like really dig into criticizing, and he wasn't even criticizing the player that much because he was just like, "Well, this is awful. I don't really need to go into that because this is evident to us all that this is awful." And remember, the Giants were doing everything they could to let the Vikings win. If you remember that game. There were so many opportunities.
I've taken pills to forget that game, so we're gonna move on.
but here's the thing. So Gruden was criticizing the Vikings for not pulling Freeman and putting in like freaking anyone. Just like anyone who knows what the offense is. It could be Cordero Patterson at quarterback. At least he's thrown the ball before, right? It could be anyone. But the thing is, the first team to sign him, the New York Giants, which was just stunning and astounding. They did cut him right before training camp, but still.
Yeah, didn't they cut him like 2 weeks after?
Yeah, it was weird. But maybe he also went through rehab or whatever. Maybe he's fine. I don't know. Miami seems like the absolute last place you want a player who has had troubles in the state of Florida getting his head right. But, I mean, money is money, I guess. So.
And there's no Shiano there to give him MRSA.
Hooray! Although, I guess Lawrence Tynes is still suing the Bucs.
Yep, Lawrence Tynes and I think other players are trying to get in on it, too.
I hope he wins the most. I hope he sues the crap out of the Bucs.
Nothing like MRSA. Nothing quite like MRSA. So, let's go to our number of the week, and this is actually going to be a pretty short one, but the number of the week this week is 1.
1? That could be any number of things. What does 1 stand for?
1 is standing for Sarah Thomas being the first woman to be a full-time ref in the in the NFL.
That's fantastic news. I'm really happy about that. Also, I hear she's very good.
Yep, she has been the first woman to officiate a major college football game, also the first to officiate a bowl game, and the first to officiate in a Big Ten stadium. She will be the first full-time female official in NFL history, but not the first to ever call a game. Shannon Easton was hired as the temp referee during the god-awful replacement refs 2012 lockout, and she was actually the first woman to officiate an NFL game.
Yeah, if I remember, the first regular season game that she officiated, there was an NFC North team in that one, I think. That wasn't too bad, and she was certainly like way better in terms of her resume. I don't know about like her performance in all of those games because I didn't track that. Her resume was certainly better than a lot of the lockout refs because there was like people fired from the Lingerie Football League, former XFL refs, but she like officiated mid-major college games, high school games, and I think she officiated like a preseason game or something at one point before any.
That sounds. Yep. I imagine Shannon Easton wasn't the one who decided to give Harbaugh an extra timeout.
Yeah, she wasn't. So
that
props.
game was so weird. Ugh.
The thing is, that day was so weird because that wasn't even the worst officiated game of that day. That was the same day as the Baltimore-New England game, where all the Baltimore fans just started shouting bullshit and they could not censor it on the broadcast.
Nope. But Sarah Thomas is also has a decent history with the NFL, not only with working with the league, but has also worked in scrimmages and practices for the Saints.
Oh yeah, fantastic.
So yeah, good for her. We have a giant mailbag to go through, so we're gonna get to some of these a little more brief than others.
Yeah, we'll quick.
And yep, let's knock a couple of these out. M. Canfield asks, "What's the deal with Michael Mauti? My guess is that he will be cut in camp. We had such high hopes."
I agree with your lament, and I think that there's a decent chance that he could get cut in camp. His greatest quality seems to be his leadership, which is not super helpful on the third string. Like you don't. This is like another Chad Greenway discussion, sort of sneakily, but you don't keep a guy on the roster just because he's a leader.
That's actually not a great quality in a third stringer.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know what the deal with Matty is. I thought he would be pushing to be at least the primary backup at one of the positions by now. Sounds like that's not happening. He is supposed to be a very good special teamer, so he's not necessarily going to get cut. But the Vikings are going to draft another 7th-round linebacker because that's what they do, and then maybe they'll draft 2 other linebackers in the draft. So maybe they'll get 3 more linebackers. Probably not, but they could. And if they do, bye-bye, Maddie.
Tommy Gunn asks the very important question of what is with Minnesotans wanting their Minnesota teams to acquire Minnesota players? Only Canadians seem to do this also.
Nah, I mean a lot of local teams want local fans want local products on their team. I see this happen a lot. It doesn't happen as much with markets that are considered to be large, but Green Bay fans definitely want Wisconsin players. Not even close. They absolutely want Wisconsin players. I know this is less true now that Seattle is like weird, but I know that Seattle fans did want Washington area players. I know even New York Giants fans like local people, and they're not even. I mean, they've got a pretty large market, I would say. And then even if you exclude the Tebow Whites in Jacksonville, there's a bunch of people in Miami and in Jacksonville that sort of wanted local players. So this happens in other markets. There's also I think people don't really think about this too much. Teams kind of do this too, but in a different way. It's sort of a pride thing, where a team doesn't want to miss, especially on like a hidden gem. Like they're okay, they're as fine picking a local guy and busting as they are picking a not local guy and busting. But teams have this sense of pride about their backyard, where if there's a hidden gem that's uncovered in their backyard, and they don't realize it, that they get like hurt by it, like that their pride gets a little. And I heard this at the combine this year. I think it was like Chuck Pagano who said it. He's like, we don't want to lose out on guys in our backyard. I know the Vikings are very big about this. When they did the pro day for when the University of Minnesota did the pro day, they always invite a ton of local people, much more than most major college pro days. In fact, I had a friend who was the center for St. Thomas Academy, won the Remington Trophy for the best center in all of Division III college football. Was in the national championship game for Division III. He was invited to that pro day, as well as many others. It was a very aggressive parsing process. If like you don't run a fast enough 40, boom, that's it, you're done. But the Vikings really talked to a lot of those local small schoolers a lot.
And they even a bunch of Vikings ended up attending the NDSU pro day as well.
Yeah, exactly. So they don't want to. The teams don't want to miss out on local guys, and fans want local guys on their team. I think across the board. So I don't think this is just a Minnesota thing. I think that the smaller-ish your market seems, not how it actually is, but the smaller-ish your market seems, the more you kind of just pull for local people because it's a sort of a pride thing. It's sort of a pulling together thing, a regionalism thing.
Next question, is Mike Wallace a new trend for the Vikings? In this case, a signing of a less than stellar, if not diva, personality player.
Decent question. I think no. I think it's harder to sign a not diva-ish personality at wide receiver. It's just like difficult. I mean, every
is that just sort of like how all chefs are inherently crazy? Like anybody who's playing wide receiver has to have a certain amount of insanity.
Yeah, I mean it just happens. Like obviously it's not a requirement, but yeah, it just happens a lot. You take a look at the three of the 4 starting receivers: Charles Johnson, Cordero Patterson, Mike Wallace. They're all very colorful personalities. Jarius Wright a lot less so. He's sort of a workman-like kind of person, but yeah, you're just going to get more of them. I don't think it's a trend. The other signings don't really have very colorful personalities, so I wouldn't think there's a trend.
Here's my favorite question of the mailbag. What is the most inaccurate analysis of a player/team you have ever made?
Oh, man. So there's a bunch of draft nicks who keep like catalog their misses, and I should do that, but I don't, and so I can't. I don't know how. I don't know if I've ever been
you don't have a loyal enough hater that will go through your tweets and go through your prognostications and be like, "Wow, you were so totally off there."
I mean, probably.
You need better haters.
I do.
You need a better quality of haters.
So Matt Miller at NFL Draft Scout and Ben Albright at Albright NFL, they have people who like pull up tweets from like 300, 600, 800 days ago and retweet them like today, which is like the most obnoxious thing I think you can do. And so like that happens a lot. I think so. I'm gonna identify two things. One, I'm not wrong on yet, although it certainly looks like I'm wrong now. The Adrian Peterson story I broke certainly seems like I'm wrong. Because if the Vikings were doing everything they could to get rid of Adrian Peterson, they probably would have acted before the running back market settled. Now they're just going to have to wait until the draft. And maybe they'll get a good deal out of him, and maybe stories will come out that'll confirm what I was hearing from three different people in the organization.
One of which being Chad Greenway.
And I still think Peterson isn't playing for the Vikings anymore. But we said we weren't going to talk about it that much, so we won't. The second thing is, I was wrong about Josh Freeman, but the defense I had from earlier in the podcast about that, I still think is true. But I was definitely wrong. The specific thing I was definitely wrong about with Josh Freeman was I thought the stuff coming out of Tampa Bay about him being a head case were total fabrications and lies by Greg Schiano. He was clearly a head case. And this isn't just like stuff from like major media reporting. This is stuff like I learned from being around Vikings players. He was definitely a head case, and he just didn't care, and he checked out. And he was like, he's clearly, there is some kind of anxiety issue or some sort of issue, like some actual mental illness issue that was holding him back. But I was definitely wrong in dismissing that. I was also kind of wrong in the strength of my advocacy for him. Mainly because of the dismissal thing. I mean, I still think he's very talented. So I'm not doing a very good job of answering this question because this question requires some level of modesty, and I'm just like not willing to give up on my misses.
So much like how all chefs are crazy and all wide receivers are a little bit diva-ish, except for Jarius Wright, who we've established. All bloggers just have a little bit of a little less gravitas, a little less levity in their mistakes. All right. Who should the Vikings take at 11? Asks Tim Clark 65 DM.
They should take pick number 12 at pick number 11.
You should try to get another pick out of the Browns.
Yeah. I don't have an answer to this. I've heard. I don't know if this is breaking news because Mike Zimmer himself personally worked him out at the Connecticut Pro Day, but I've heard the Vikings are like big on Byron Jones. So breaking news for like the however many people listen to the podcast. But I don't know if they're like pick number 11 big on him. The one linebacker they haven't brought in is Eric Kendricks, and a lot of people are saying, hey, they never brought in Harrison Smith. Maybe they're as big on Eric Kendricks as they were on Harrison Smith, and they didn't want to tip anyone off. I don't know if that's true because they coached Harrison Smith at the Senior Bowl, so they kind of learned everything they needed to know about him. They didn't really have that opportunity with Eric Kendricks. But, I mean, maybe they just interviewed Anthony Barr, and so they've learned everything they want to know about him. But, I mean, I don't think that's as much of a reach as everyone else is saying. I think that that's a fine pick at number 11. And that's sort of my favorite first-round pick for the Vikings. But I understand wanting to get as much value as you can out of this sort of situation. So I think the Vikings should not pick at 11. I don't like Trey Waynes. I just do not. I like Marcus Peters. I wouldn't mind picking him, even at 11. I think he's the best quarterback in the draft. I don't really like the idea of picking a wide receiver early in a draft that's this deep at wide receiver. And again, I don't think that the wide receiver position is as needy as a lot of people are saying it is. I kind of like Scherf, and I kind of like La'el Collins. Or sorry, it's pronounced Sheriff. Brandon Sheriff. And I like La'el Collins, and I think that that's like there's a smart strategy there of picking a guy who's going to play guard for a year and then he could play tackle next year if Matt Khalil's development doesn't rebound in the way that we want it to, because they can play both positions, they can play both at a very high level. I like those ideas a lot, but I like the idea of trading down more than those ideas. And if the only way to get Kendricks was to pick him at 11, I'd be all for it. If the only way to get Scherf was to pick him at 11, I'd still hesitate. You know what I mean? So I am not as big on them, but also I just don't think the Vikings are going to pick an offensive lineman in the first 2 rounds. So it's difficult to advocate something I don't think will happen. So yeah, I don't really have a huge opinion on this. If Amari Cooper falls to 11, screw it. We don't have a need a wide receiver, but he's way too good.
Question from Kyle Segel. I'm going to call him Segel now.
Segel.
Segel. It's just more fun to mispronounce Kyle's name. He asks, so what are we going to do with Mays? Nickel linebacker? Safety depth? What are we going to do with him?
Great job, Kile Segel. That's a good question. I think rotational nickel depth, I think that he can platoon as sort of like a dime linebacker or a nickel linebacker. I think that he is sort of safety depth, but not really. But I do think he is great on special teams. The reason he's not a very good safety is because he's slightly slow to recognize, but more importantly, he's just very stiff. He doesn't move laterally very well. He doesn't change directions very well. At linebacker, you can get away with it, especially with the fact that he's stiff relative to safeties. And he hits like a Mack truck. It's awesome. So I kind of like him at nickel linebacker, or like a hybrid linebacker safety position more than I like him anywhere else. And he's great on special teams.
Gerald Tracy III on Twitter says, the Vikings are on the clock. You're the GM, and everyone you want is on the board. Who do you pick, and do they come in and start?
If I have a bunch of Tier 1 players that are all still available, I trade down easily, because I can get one of my Tier 1 players. Because Tier 1 basically just means I have all of these players graded equally, because otherwise you'd have other tiers. So if everyone I want is on the board, I trade down and let whoever pick whoever, because the reason they're that place on the board is because they're the mix of talent and need that I've already evaluated. I just think it's just basic strategy to just let the other ones go down, which is why I liked the strategy in when the Vikings had pick 23 and 25 in the 2013 draft. Between Sharif Floyd and Xavier Rhodes, you obviously pick Sharif Floyd at 23 because the Colts were not going to pick a cornerback, and it turns out they did not. But they could conceivably pick a defensive tackle / he would be a defensive end for them. And people were more likely going to trade up for Sharif Floyd, who was falling, than Xavier Rhodes, who was about to go where he was about to go. So, same idea. You pick so that the players that you want, so you can minimize the number of players that are left in the same tier on your board.
Yep. So, in case you are just tuning in, we are a believer of trading our pick to the Browns and letting the chips fall where they may. Let's go to Jake Anderson at NFL Draft Talker, who says, or rather, who asks, how early would you take Gurley? What's the cutoff? He's the clear-cut best running back in this class, and it's not even close.
Yeah, I think Gurley is the best running back in the class, and I think that the gap between him and number 2 is somewhat significant. I don't want to pick him because, A, I think that whatever pick that he ends up being valued at by the NFL as a whole, I think that the Vikings, if they're able to maneuver their way into that pick, would do a better job picking like a linebacker or a cornerback or even one of these safeties that can convert from cornerback than they are a running back. Not because I think the running back position is devalued. I've made that clear when I was talking about Adrian Peterson's contract value, but because the Vikings already have a very good running back, and I think it's most efficient to complement him than it is to just get a starter. So that's one. 2, I'm more concerned about his ACL than most people are. So the good thing about Gurley's ACL tear is that I hear that it's clean, so which is easier to repair. And I hear he tore like nothing else. He didn't tear his meniscus. He didn't tear his MCL. There wasn't really any bone damage, which, I mean, that's kind of astounding in itself, and that makes it very easy to heal. And so relative to other ACL repairs, that's not a big deal. But, like, it's not nothing. I don't know why people keep on treating this sort of stuff as if it's nothing. They just talk about it as if his value is going to fall. I think it's still a big risk, because what makes him such a good running back is his speed combined with his power. It's what makes almost any great running back. I mean, like, people like Barry Sanders sort of excluded, right? Because he's not really known for his power. But both of those things start at your feet and go up through your knees, right? And if you can't cut, I think that's a problem. I mean, we see a lot of these successful ACL repairs happen where players are the same or even better. Adrian Peterson, Jamal Charles, really good examples, especially at the running back position. But, I mean, people never, like, they don't remember anymore all of these ACL, sort of recently even, that didn't bear out. I mean, medical technology is great, and medical science improving is fantastic, and increases the odds. But, I mean, does no one remember that Robert Griffin III, one of his issues is not that he is dumb. He's certainly a very, very smart quarterback, both on the whiteboard and on the field. He can't. People talk about him not being able to run anymore as the reason that he's not good, and they talk about this as if it's like they're disparaging him, and maybe they're right. I don't think that's the case. I think that it's like planting and accuracy and whatnot. But if the reason is because he can't run anymore, then clearly the injury had an effect on his ability to run, and we're talking about running backs. When we talk about Gurley, other running backs have not been able to recover from these sorts of knee injuries with the same explosions. I mean, Willis McGahee, if you want to go back a little bit, never came back to what he once was. I mean, he was really fast.
He's kind of the patron saint of running backs with tears like that.
Yeah, and the fact that he could play at all is kind of phenomenal. So I am really worried about that. I wouldn't take Gurley until late in the second, and I think I'm probably the lowest on him. These injuries are like real things to me, and so it's not like Marcus Lattimore, who tore his ACL 3 times, right? Which is like a different problem, or Michael Mauti, who tore his ACL 3 times. But I mean, it's not like Marcus Lattimore is not instructive. After he tore his ACL once, he tore it again. That's pretty recent. That's pretty good medical stuff, pretty good medical science that helped Lattimore, and he tore his ACL again. And so I think Gurley is a bigger injury risk than people are talking about.
Well, let's go to our email questions from Nathan Schatzel, who asks, now that we have signed Babatunde, what happens to him? Can the Vikings coaching staff instruct him at all? Does he have to hire a personal coach? Since he's a free agent and not a draft pick, does he get the playbook?
Last question first. Yes, he gets the playbook. Then the rest of the questions. He's going to end up on the practice squad if the Vikings like his work ethic. The coaching staff does instruct him. It is very difficult to teach technique at the NFL level. It does happen. A lot of coaching staffs don't do a very good job of it. Not because they're not able to coach it, but because it's like lower on the priority list than like teaching the scheme or game planning or installing new plays every week. You just don't have time to teach technique. The Vikings are the character of team that is less important, that they were more likely to teach technique. Zimmer preaches it constantly. So I think the Vikings do teach him. I think it would help Babatunde to get a personal coach, but I don't know sort of if that fits the plans the Vikings would have for him, because certain offensive line coaches have certain techniques they want their offensive line to learn because it works sort of in cohesion with what they're doing in the scheme. So, for example, you don't teach a bucket step to an offensive lineman in a pure gap/power running scheme, right? There's no reason to do that. The hand placement's different and stuff. So it would be difficult to hire a personal coach to teach Babatunde Aigbusi without interfering with what Jeff Davidson wants to do. But that doesn't mean it's like a bad idea necessarily to get sort of the basics down from a personal coach that can spend more time on him. But I think the Viking staff does instruct him sort of closely. He's going to be on the practice squad for a year, so whoever.
Yeah. Next question. Seems like a lot of the draft strategy for the Vikings leans on factors that we as fans don't know. How are the off seasons of Patterson and Yankee going? I don't think there was definitive moves that showed one way or another. And do you think that number 11 brings out or gets a little bit different after a free agency? Has it changed?
Yeah, I've written actually about this problem before. Um, a lot of other teams, especially ones that I've identified positions of worry, right, or positions that underperformed last year. A lot of other teams have definitive answers, right? Like the Colts knew that the running back position sucked, so they cut Trent Richardson. There's no question, right? Um, a bunch of teams know that they have bad quarterbacks, right? Um, Teams know that they have bad linebackers. The Vikings don't know that they have bad players at a lot of these positions. And even less, fans know even less whether or not that's true because all of these positions have players that are young and promising, and they all have like reasons that you think they could succeed at the next level that are not like you're not just bullshitting yourself, right? Like there's legitimate reasons, rational reasons to think that all of these players have the ability to be really good. And I think like at wide receiver, I think Cordero Patterson's a good point, right? As the third or fourth receiver behind Charles Johnson and Mike Wallace, kind of weird thing to think about because he's supposed to be the second one behind Greg Jennings. He could develop. It could click this year. His attitude has theoretically changed. His coaching with I believe it was Troy Brown according to reports had gone well. I don't know what that means, but good. I thought he improved at a lot of things between year 1 and year 2. They just asked him to do different stuff in year 2, which is why you have this problem with his development and getting on the field. So I don't know how his development is going, but these are questions that I mean he's right that we don't have answers to that will drive a lot of the draft strategy. Same with Yankee. If Yankee has gained the requisite strength that the Vikings want him to, if he's resolved some of the balance concerns that were coming out of the draft for him, I think he's definitely a starter. He's got great technique, excellent quickness and speed, very high level awareness. One of the better players on the team in terms of sort of that kind of awareness already. But I just don't know if the workout and this off-season conditioning did enough, right? So yeah, I think that this is correct. I don't think the number 11 pick has changed because of free agency, just because the Vikings haven't really done anything. I think if anything, it makes it less likely that we get a wide receiver because of this Mike Wallace trade. But yeah, it's difficult to tell because there's more uncertainty at these positions than there are at other positions. Just because they did badly last year as a group does not mean we can project this very young, very inexperienced group to do poorly again next year.
Final question. On the scale of number of websites that Arif doesn't write for to number of vowels in Babatunde Erubusi, how excited is Arif in seeing Greenway for another training camp?
So between 0 and 9, huh? I'm kind of excited. I like him as a person. He's very charismatic, very funny.
He's got a great family.
Clearly very forgiving.
That's not, you don't hear Chris Collinsworth talking about the level of forgiveness that a player has on like a Sunday night. You only get that sort of hard-hitting analysis here at Norse Code. Well, he's a very forgiving player when I write an article about him.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so think about Aaron Henderson. Someone wrote, it was 1500 ESPN, I think it was Tom Pelissero, basically wrote, I don't know if this transition from outside linebacker to inside linebacker is going to work, but it's an interesting experiment. We'll see if he gets to keep the starting job. So he wrote that, right? So first day of training camp, everyone asks Aaron Henderson, hey, so what's this? Do you think you're going to keep the middle linebacker job? He's like, I'm pissed at all of you. I am so angry. I can't believe that you think I can't be the starter And like, it basically just wrote what it doesn't. And I don't want to knock Tom Pellisser's work because it was clearly the best work the local beat has seen in years. Right, Pellisser is great. But that particular sentence doesn't take a lot of, like, it's just like, yeah, he's transitioning positions. He was not phenomenal at the previous position, and the Vikings could invest in a linebacker, and they did. They invested in a linebacker, so maybe he doesn't keep his job. Like, it doesn't take a lot of logical leaps to get there, right? And Aaron Henderson is so pissed at everyone for basically saying, yeah, maybe he doesn't keep his job. Who knows? And he's just like angry. And I wrote, Chad Greenway has been bad at football for 3 years, and I want to really be painstakingly clear about how terrible of a football player he is and how bad he is at football. And Greenway goes, hey, man, well, what's wrong? Let's talk it out. This is really cool. We talk about the article. Let's schedule an interview. This is my wife, and this is my child. Meet them. They're cool people. I'm just like, wait, what? And Jerome Simpson went after Tom Pelissero before Jerome Simpson got cut and Tom Pelissero got promoted. I think I know who won that one.
The check was in the mail there.
But yeah, there's a lot of players that don't like it, shockingly, when you're like, yeah, they're bad and they should feel bad. Chad Greenway, evidently, I mean, he doesn't like it, but he doesn't really let it show, which is nice.
Well, that I think that'll cover it for this week. Anything to plug from Vikings territory?
Listen to those podcasts from Andy. There's one with Paul Allen that I did not mention. There's like some interesting tidbits there. There's also one with Matt Waldman that I did mention that is great. It goes over the top receiver prospects, the top running back prospects. It talks a little bit about late round quarterbacks. Matt Waldman gives his sleepers. He gives a lot of his good opinions on why this is the thing that I think is important, why he thinks things are true, and why he might be wrong about those things. Those are all great, and so I would listen to that. I don't have anything planned at Vikings territory very soon. I continue to write daily for the Bleacher Report, but nothing I'm super excited about as of right now.
Well, that is going to be it for this week for Dusty, who will return when he's done with his PCP. And for Arif, my name is James Pagashnik, and our formula is this here at Norse Code. Trade the pick to Cleveland. We will see you next week.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.